Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, members of Congress, esteemed guests, speakers, and partners both here and in the field. Watching online from all over the world, welcome. I am so delighted to be here with you all today in celebration of the critical work that the U.S. government and its partners are doing to advance women's economic security. My name is Kat Fotovat, and I'm the senior official and acting ambassador at large for the Office of Global Women's Issues here at the U.S. Department of State. My office leads the department's efforts to elevate the advancement of gender equity and equality as a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. To achieve this goal, we count on all of you to help us identify the opportunities and address the challenges impeding women and girls' participation and leadership in the economy, political systems, and society. Over the past year, we have consulted with members of Congress and over 200 organizations and groups from civil society, academia, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector, both here, at home, and in the field. We thank you all so much for helping us identify the challenges to economic participation and the need for leadership by women and girls around the world. And your recommendations, please know we heard you, on ways to advance gender equity and equality and to improve global security and increase women's financial stability, grow our global economy, and better respond to global crises. The challenges of COVID, climate change, and crisis, and conflict all over the world have both short and long-term effects, which are detrimental on our international markets, our local communities, our schools, businesses, markets, and our homes. We need concerted attention to improve women's economic security, from limiting women's access to safe and quality employment to addressing the unfair and unpaid care burden that prevents women from fully participating in the formal workforce and forced women who withdrew in disproportionate numbers during the pandemic, to also addressing the lack of access to digital technology, capital, investment, and to the persistent and pervasive gender-based violence in the workplace, at home, and in online spaces. The systematic exclusion of women and girls, especially those from marginalized and underserved communities, in key decision-making spaces, these are all areas that need immediate attention as we globally build back. Many of you here today also attended the December launch of our update to the U.S. strategy to prevent and respond to gender-based violence globally. We are so proud to be building a mutually reinforcing policy infrastructure as we work to implement the national strategy on gender equity and equality. With this first ever women's economic security strategy, we are committed to the strategic engagement and action to ensure the full economic participation, leadership, and contribution of women and girls in all their diversity. This will require diverse voices, tools, and ideas, some of which we've captured here, and some of which we will come from you in years to come as we implement this strategy. And thank you all so much in advance for stepping up and being a part of the solution. We are grateful to our many partners who are already doing tremendous work to advance women's economic security. For example, the OECD's partnership in expanding the quality and quantity of gender data related to gender digital divide, teleworking, taxes and benefits, parental leave, and other areas which are so important to making informed policy decisions and meaningfully support women's economic security. And now, I have the honor and privilege of welcoming Jennifer Klein, Assistant to the President and Director of the White House Gender Policy Council, which she has led since President Biden first established the Gender Policy Council by executive order in March of 2021. Director Klein is no stranger to the challenges outlined in this strategy, having worked on domestic and global gender policy throughout her career. And on a personal note, I am so grateful for her incredible leadership and championship of this strategy, and so much of the work that my office does. Director Klein, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kat, Acting Ambassador Fodevat. Good morning, and thank you for joining us here in Washington and virtually from around the world. As Kat said, I'm Jen, and I lead the Gender Policy Council at the White House. I'm really proud to be here today alongside Secretary Blinken, Administrator Power, and leaders from across our administration at the launch of the first ever U.S. strategy on global women's economic security, which is testament to the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to this critical priority. Women's full participation in the economy is essential to economic growth and the realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms for half the population. This first ever strategy is grounded in the wealth of evidence that advancing women's participation promotes economic prosperity and stability, and it addresses the significant persisting gender gaps in economic security. Studies show that closing gender gaps in the workforce would add between $12 and $28 trillion in global GDP over a decade. And expanding women's access to markets and finance fosters entrepreneurship and innovation, with estimates suggesting that gender parity in entrepreneurship could add between $5 to $6 trillion in net value to the global economy. Despite the clear evidence of the benefits of women's economic participation, too often social, legal, and financial barriers remain. We know that on average, women spend more than twice the amount of time than men do performing unpaid care work, and that the annual value of this work is approximately $11 trillion globally. We recognize that 2.4 billion working-age women still face legal obstacles to their full economic participation, and that dismantling these systemic barriers is necessary to unlocking economic gains. And as Kat has just said, we know that the global COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on women's employment, with devastating effects on their families, their communities, and economies. The strategy on global women's economic security that we're issuing today will advance women's economic participation as a key strategic objective of our domestic and foreign policy. The strategy lays out an ambitious agenda to advance women's economic security globally by reducing wage gaps, improving care infrastructure, promoting entrepreneurship and financial and digital inclusion, and dismantling legal, social, and cultural barriers to women's economic participation. And it calls for the partnership with other governments, NGOs, and local groups, multilateral organizations, and the private sector, among others. A critical example of our commitment to advancing women's economic security globally is our investment in the Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund, which the administration announced at the UN Generation Equality Forum in Paris. This fund is specifically dedicated to promoting economic security for women and girls by increasing their access to resources, services, and leadership opportunities, and by addressing the barriers that limit their ability to participate fully in the economy. The fund invests in local and civil society partners around the world, prioritizing programs that address the disproportionate impact of COVID, climate change, conflict, and crisis on women and girls. Through this fund, the U.S. government has supported vital projects across the globe that advance women's economic security, including investments in child care infrastructure in low and middle income countries, support for women's economic resilience in Afghanistan, promoting access to green jobs in Kenya and South Africa, strengthening regional networks for businesswomen in Eastern Europe, and supporting women's access to sustainable value chains in Latin America, to name just a few examples. Administrator Power and our USAID colleagues will share a bit more about this critical work in just a bit. The strategy we're launching today is the product of close collaboration among 12 U.S. departments and agencies, and was informed by consultations with over 200 civil society actors and external stakeholders from more than 30 countries. I'm grateful to all of you who gave your time and your expertise to this effort and are joining us today to recognize this first ever interagency policy. As we turn to the important work of implementing this new strategy, we'll continue to rely on collaboration within and outside of the U.S. government to achieve our shared vision for women's full and equitable participation in the global economy. I'd like now to turn to a critical partner and introduce a champion for global women's economic security, Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, first of all, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the State Department. A Happy New Year to everyone. This is actually the first event that I've had an opportunity to do in this new year, and I think that's very fitting and only underscores the importance that this department attaches to it and that I attach to it personally. Director Klein, Jen, thank you for the introduction, but also and especially for your leadership, for the Gender Policy Council's leadership in developing the U.S. Global Women's Economic Security Strategy that we are, in fact, launching today. Jen and I have been colleagues, friends, going back, a few years. I think we both started out together in the Clinton administration in grade school, right? But I am just grateful for the collaboration that goes forward every day. And Kat, I'm so grateful to you for your remarkable leadership of GWE in this very consequential time, and especially for the remarkable collaboration that we have between the White House, the State Department, and the other agencies in our government. That is a big difference maker. This strategy would not be possible without the vital contributions of so many, starting with another dear friend and close colleague, Administrator Power. Her team at USAID has done remarkable work on this, and you're going to hear more from Samantha in a short while. The GWE office here at State, besides Kat, an amazing team doing great work, and again, across our entire government. We're also deeply fortunate to have the collaboration and leadership of the United States Congress. And I'm told that Sheila Jackson-Lee may be in the House somewhere. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Andre Carson, in the House anywhere? I think he was going to join us. But to you, to Barbara Lee, who was going to be with us this morning, but I think got tied up on the Hill, so grateful for this collaboration, for the leadership that you've demonstrated over so many years, and which is coming to fruition in this strategy. I especially, though, want to say to our partners in civil society, the private sector, other governments, women from all walks of life. Some of you are here in person, some of you are tuning in virtually. Thank you. Thank you for your input. Thank you for the collaboration. Thank you for ensuring that this strategy reflects the breadth and the depth of our vision for women's economic security. President Biden came into office with a commitment to gender equality and equity because, as he put it, and I quote, "Governments, economies, and communities are stronger when they include the full participation of women." It's as simple and as straightforward as that. As you've just heard from Jen, he has put that commitment into action, including through the first ever national strategy on gender equity and equality, which brings a whole-of-government approach to supporting women and girls, both here at home, but also around the world. At the State Department, the idea that every woman and girl should be able to reach her full potential is central to our diplomacy. Whenever women's rights and fundamental freedoms come under threat, we speak up, we mobilize others, we take action. Promoting gender equality and equity is also an affirmative part of our approach because we recognize that doing so is essential to addressing some of the world's most pressing challenges. We need women's full economic participation to actually lead an inclusive recovery from the COVID pandemic. As you've heard, we need their leadership in resolving conflict. We need their ideas and their innovation to tackle the climate crisis. The strategy that we're putting forward has at its heart a simple vision: creating a world in which all women and girls, everywhere, can contribute to and benefit from economic growth and global prosperity. That's a world in which we will all be better off. Closing the gender gap in the workforce by 2025, as you've heard, would add up to $28 trillion to the global economy, especially at a time when we are working to recover from COVID, deal with the impact of climate, address the many conflicts that are also holding back the global economy. That contribution is more vital than ever. The strategy focuses on breaking down some of the barriers that stand in the way of women to full economic participation. Jen and Kat alluded to some of them. Discriminatory policies that perpetuate unequal pay or limit access to credit that women entrepreneurs and innovators need to start and grow businesses. Laws that ban women from energy, manufacturing, and other industries in certain countries. Attitudes and practices that drive women out of education and out of the labor market. The strategy that we put in place is focused on supporting women and girls in all of their diversity, including the women who most often face the greatest and highest barriers, such as those from marginalized backgrounds, from religious minorities, those with disabilities, LGBTQI+ persons, and we're committed to standing up for women wherever their rights are threatened, including in Afghanistan, as unfortunately we continue to see deepen and get worse. Let me just spend a few minutes addressing in a little bit more detail the 4 key lines of effort that are at the heart of this strategy. First, we will advance women's economic competitiveness so that more women can fully participate and lead in all sectors and all industries, including as CEOs and board members. One way we're helping to do that is through programs like We Champs, which will provide technical assistance and training to women's chambers of commerce and business associations in 18 countries across Europe to support women-owned small businesses. That's one practical example of how we will bring that first pillar of the strategy to life. Second, we will strengthen the foundational support, childcare, elder care, that allows women to participate equitably in the economy. As you know, as you've heard again this morning, COVID-19 forced millions of women around the world to withdraw from the workforce, to take on caregiving responsibilities for their families. So, we will expand access to options so that caregivers, most of whom are women, can actually return to work. To do that, we're supporting programs like the World Bank's Invest in Child Care initiative, which will help improve access to quality, affordable child care in low and middle income countries around the world. Third, we will promote women's entrepreneurship by addressing some of the challenges that too often hold women back, including a lack of mentorship, and training opportunities. We're working to both create and also, as appropriate, replicate efforts like the U.S.-India Alliance for Women's Economic Empowerment. That connects the private sector and civil society to provide Indian women with technical skills and networking opportunities to help them grow their businesses. At the Alliance's launch, Google India committed to mentoring 1 million Indian women entrepreneurs. We're working with other partners to increase that number. That would have a remarkable impact. Finally, we will work with partners to help dismantle some of the societal, legal, and regulatory barriers that stand in the way of having a level playing field, like laws that make it more challenging for women to work in certain roles, limiting their career progression. Now, if you look at some of the work and studies that have been done, for example, the World Bank, women have equal legal economic standing with men in 12 countries around the world. 12 countries around the world, including through equal pay and legal protections in the workplace. So, there's a huge amount of work to be done there, and looking at the glass half full as opposed to half empty, a tremendous amount of opportunity as we grow the number of countries that offer genuinely equal opportunity. We'll encourage countries to repeal discriminatory laws. We'll advocate for reforms to promote gender equality, in part by showing the opportunity posed by closing these gender gaps. Across each of these lines of effort, we will work in tandem with partners around the world. Indeed, we'll be working with all of you, because we need all hands on deck if we're actually going to make a difference, if we're going to build sustainable, long-lasting change. That includes, for our part, working with counterparts from other governments to develop their own domestic and global strategies for women's economic security. It includes applying the lessons from this work across the United States government as we build out action plans for each agency and each department to advance women's economic security. At the end of the day, if you sort of cut all of this away and go to the heart of what we're talking about, there's also something very simple and straightforward. promoting women's economic security is the right thing to do, but it's also the smart and necessary thing to do. When everyone can contribute to their full potential, our economies are more prosperous, our societies are more full of opportunity, our nations are more peaceful, and everyone is better off. There, too, it's as simple and as straightforward as that. There's a huge amount of work to be done to make this real, to take the strategy that we've now put in place and to implement it. That's going to take, as I said, all hands on deck. The work that so many of you have done to bring us to this moment when we have a strong strategy on paper has been absolutely essential. That's the good news. The bad news is we now have to get to work to make it real, and we're counting on all of you to help us do that. Thank you very, very much.
All right, so many thanks to the Secretary for his leadership. Happy New Year. This has been a long time coming, this strategy, so I am beyond thrilled. So great to see all of you today. We're going to have a 5-minute break right now, followed by remarks by USAID Administrator Power and the rest of today's program and panel discussion. So please be seated by 11:25. Thank you all again so much for being here.